Hello, I'm Henning Stavens. I'm a biologist with Weyerhaeuser, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us this morning on the behalf of the National Association of Forest Owners, Maine Department of Inland Fish and Wildlife, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Maine Forest Products Council, and others. And what we're here today to discuss and brainstorm on is conservation opportunities around the wood turtle. And our first speaker will delve into a little more on the background on the collaborative that's formed around this, and also why the wood turtle. But I'd like to thank everyone in advance for thoughtful and productive discussions today as we all work to bring ourselves up to the same level on wood turtle ecology, working forest practices, some research updates, and then we'll have an open session at the end. And I'm just going to share my screen here and review our agenda today. And as I mentioned, we'll have a little discussion around the Wildlife Conservation Initiative that led to today's event on the wood turtle. We'll have some discussions and descriptions of wood turtle ecology, talk a little bit about Maine forest management stream regulations, and I know we have some folks on the call from other states, but we're kind of focused here today on Maine. We'll have some research updates, and maybe not everyone is listed there that might provide an update. So, but thank you for some brief updates. And then we'll have a kind of an open session near the end to address either some questions that we didn't get to, or, and more importantly, some brainstorming sessions. So some housekeeping. We are recording this session, and a link to the recording will be provided in post-event notes, so you can share that with others who couldn't make it today. We don't have a break or anything, so feel free to get up and stretch and take care of a bio break as needed. We do, I think our speakers have calculated some time in for some questions after each of their talks, but also please feel free to use the chat function, and we can address those questions either as they come up in between talks, after the talks, or in our general discussion session near the end. And for those who are interested in continuing credits for forestry licenses, we will be putting forth both a Fisheries Improvement Network meeting and this wood turtle workshop to the board, and receiving hopefully some credits. And we'll also follow up with notes around those. So if you're interested, please let us know, and we can make sure to include you in that. So I think with that, I will turn the baton over to Tony Turr with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to start us off. Tony.
All right, thank you, Henning. Let's see, is it showing okay?
It is.
All right.
We've got the maybe presentation mode would give us a fuller screen.
There's too many screens here. All right. Got
There
it
we go. Perfect.
So, hello and good morning, everyone. My name's Anthony Tour. Most people call me Tony. I am the Fish and Wildlife Services at-risk and species coordinator for the region. In that capacity, I work with various groups and partners to support pre-listing conservation and for species that are kind of headed in the wrong direction, that are declining. And so what we're after with the at-risk work is to try and get those species kind of course corrected so that they are on a better path and hopefully don't end up needing the support of the Endangered Species Act. I've been working for the Fish and Wildlife Service in various programs in various locations for almost 25 years, working in our Partners for Fish and Wildlife program, working with mostly private landowners in that capacity, implementing habitat conservation projects, but also spent some time in the Endangered Species Program and before my current duties. Quite familiar with Maine. I did my undergraduate work in Maine, so and still venture from my home to New Hampshire to northern Maine annually. So a little bit about the Wildlife Conservation Initiative. So the service is working closely with the National Alliance of Forest Owners to do some proactive conservation work for species. And a little bit of background on the National Alliance of Forest Owners. They're comprised of mostly timber management companies and other groups that own and manage over 4.6 million acres in the United States. A large proportion of that acreage is in the Southeast, the Northeast, the upper Midwest, and then in the Pacific Northwest. And we're working at a national level on various topics. NAFO members are committed to sustainable forest management for timber production, carbon sequestration, maintaining air and water quality, providing habitat for wildlife and plants, providing recreation lands, and then also renewable energy. In the Northeast, most NAFO lands are found in Maine, with work also occurring, or a lot of ownership in West Virginia as well. You can learn quite a bit more about NAFO at the website. I've got the link there at the bottom of the page. So the NAFO and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service are collaborating to conserve at-risk and federally listed species, and there's basically 4 components to that wildlife initiative work. The first one is identifying target species, so species that we want to work on. Also, then once we do that, develop some management guidelines that help ensure that NAFO members are providing good quality habitat to support viable populations of those species. And then also we have a kind of a science component where we're interested in monitoring the species response to that stewardship that NAFO members are affording. We want to try and quantify NAFO's contribution to them. And then finally, there's a communication component to the work, and really want to kind of expound the benefits that NAFO is providing to those species and everything. And a lot of this has to do with, I think, just making consumers really aware of, sustainability practices that by forest landowners and how they manage their timberlands and to benefit multiple resource concerns. I should mention too that we work really closely with the National Council for Air and Stream Improvement, or NCASI, and that group really helps us with the science support of the whole aspect of our work. For northern Maine, one of the species that we've really want to work on is the wood turtle. We are have done a little bit of work around Canada lynx and Furbish's lousewort, but that's definitely kind of a more minimal involvement than what we're hoping to kind of gear up with wood turtle. And I'm not going to get into a lot of the details on wood turtle biology, et cetera. Phillip and DeMaynadier, I'm not sure I pronounced that right, Phillip, and Derek Yorks will be covering a lot of that. But it turns out that wood turtles, as Henning mentioned, are a species that the service has been petitioned to review for listing under the Endangered Species Act, and we're currently scheduled to complete that listing determination in 2023. That said, there is a tremendous amount of work going on for the conservation of the species across the Northwest and now into the upper Midwest, with NAFO members and others as well. But the big thing here is that it turns out that northern Maine is home to some globally important populations of wood turtle. That's all I have, Henning.
Great. Thank you, Tony, for that introduction. Any questions about the Wildlife Conservation Initiative or how we landed on wood turtle, or any thoughts from the group? Not hearing any, we will turn to Derek Yorks with the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. Derek, all yours.
Okay. Can everyone hear me all right? Okay, thanks, Henning. I'm just going to get my screen going here, and thanks, Tony. Let's see. Just looking for where I can share my screen. Oh, there it is. All right. Can everybody see that? Okay.
Yep, looks great.
Okay, good. All right. Well, yeah, thanks, everyone. My name is Derek Yorks. I'm a biologist with the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, where I serve as the department's lead on reptiles. So turtles are a big part of my work program, and wood turtles are certainly in there. Today, I just wanted to give kind of overview introduction to wood turtles, their biology and ecology status, and then also really kind of dig into what their habitat is like, and just to give everyone a good sense of, what is a wood turtle? What do they look like? And really, what does their habitat look like? And for that, I have a lot of pretty pictures of some really beautiful, mostly or totally all Maine wood turtle habitat. So for the fellow wood turtle experts in the room, bear with me on the Wood Turtles 101, and in the end, we'll get to see some good Maine wood turtle habitat as well. So the wood turtle, Glyptemys insculpta, is kind of medium-sized North American turtle, primarily inhabits streams and rivers, surrounding uplands. They are pretty distinctive. There's not too many species that you could mix an adult wood turtle up with. They, size-wise, as adults, they're a bit bigger than a painted turtle, and definitely smaller than a snapping turtle. So kind of closer in size to a painted turtle, 6 to maybe 10 inches in terms of the shell length. They have these distinctive orange salmon colored areas on their necks and inner parts of their limbs. And they have shells that are really, they're brown or gray. You know, the coloration is not really bright on the shells, but they're very kind of ornately kind of sculpted looking, almost look like an old piece of carved oak furniture or something. And they have, except on the very oldest individuals, there's very clear annuli or growth rings that you can see on the shells. You can see it on the plaster on the underside of this adult male here. You can see those growth rings, and you can actually use those to age wood turtles, at least when they're younger and they're still growing. Eventually, they stop adding those growth rings. That's not unlike a tree, at least up until a point. So yeah, so they're a distinctive, really beautiful turtle. They're kind of emblematic of undeveloped forested stream and river systems. And it's really where they thrive, are in these areas that are not heavily disturbed by lots of human activities. So another shot just to show you kind of how big they can get. These are 2 large adult males from up in Aroostook County. So you won't really see wood turtles getting any bigger than that. But I like this photo because you can see that sculpted shell even from this far away. And you can also see that they're pretty kind of stocky or burly turtles. They have big feet and heavy claws, almost like built more like a tortoise than what you would think for an aquatic turtle. And they are a semi-terrestrial species. They spend a lot of time on land in addition to in streams and rivers. As hatchlings, they start out being a bit more drab. They don't have that orange salmon coloration for the first couple of years. And you can see down the turtle at the bottom there, that's a 2 or 3 year old, which is starting to get some of that coloration. So hatchlings they're a little trickier to ID, but you're not as likely to come across them unless you happen to be out in the right place at the very right time. So wood turtle range, we already saw a similar map in Tony's presentation, but they're found throughout New England, much of the Northeast, as far south as eastern West Virginia, northern Virginia, and the Appalachian Mountains. Then the western range limits get out to bits of Minnesota and Iowa, and certainly Wisconsin and Michigan are important parts of the Midwestern range for the species. And then they're also found in eastern Canada, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. So wood turtles are a semi-terrestrial species, and their primary habitat are these clear, cold streams and rivers that are dominated by a sand, gravel, or rock substrate, or some combination of those. And they also make a lot of use of the surrounding uplands. and they're capable of going quite far into the uplands. Though predominantly most telemetry studies on the species have found that it's primarily the area within about 300 feet of the stream that they're mostly using. So definitely every study also has turtles going much further than that, but that kind of 300-foot corridor on either side is the heavy used area around these streams. I have a lot of photos and aerial images later in the presentation that will kind of show just what these habitats look like. Seasonal activity patterns for wood turtles, they're active roughly April through October, though at the southern end of their range in Virginia, West Virginia, they're going to start earlier than that and keep being active later. Here in Maine, you'll get some activity in April, except for kind of the most northern, northwestern parts of the state. It probably doesn't start more until May. Definitely still winter in April in much of northern Maine. This is a species, like I said before, they make extensive use of upland habitat, including forests, forest clearings, fields, and early successional habitat through the kind of middle of the season. Especially, I put May through September, but it's especially kind of July through September is when they're ranging farthest out into the uplands. Nesting occurs mostly in the month of June here in Maine. During that June nesting period, you'll find turtles congregated around nesting areas, which are also get into that specific habitat, but they're open canopy, sand, gravel, substrate areas, which are often beaches and point bars that are in the stream, right on the edge of the stream. But also they will readily make use of anthropogenic nesting habitats. So gravel road shoulders and sometimes log landings and sand and gravel pits. Anywhere where you have an open canopy and disturbed, predominantly sand gravel soil. Wood turtles, like I said, they spend a lot of time in the uplands during the summer months, and in the early autumn when it starts to get cooler at night, you start maybe getting a frost or two. They move back to the streams, and then that's where they overwinter. So from currently and then right through the winter until April or so, they're in the streams, they're underwater. So wood turtles are a long-lived, late to mature turtle species, which most turtle species fall into that category. And generally turtles that have that kind of a life history, they exhibit really high adult survivalship. So as adults, their annual survival rates might be 98%. They have a really good chance of living through the year after year. They reach maturity at between 12 and 20 years. I think in Maine, it might be closer to the lower end of that spectrum, probably 12 to 15 years or something around there. But they're known to live in the wild for over 50 years. And there's reason to believe, primarily based on similar, closely related turtle species, that they probably can live a lot longer than that. So these can be, they're really long-lived animals. They're comparable to people, really, in terms of how long they live. They spend a lot of their time basking and foraging. And so thermoregulation for any reptile is an important activity, and they kind of move around based on where they can get warm and get cool if they need to. Wood turtles are omnivorous. They eat a wide range of prey, various plants, mushrooms, invertebrates such as earthworms, insects. They also feed on carrion, amphibians. It's still there's still a lot to be learned about their diets. Threats and status of wood turtles. They are a species that has declined over the last century or so. Like many other turtles and many other wildlife species, habitat loss is a big threat for wood turtles, and habitat fragmentation as well as direct sources of mortality, such as roadkill, which goes hand in hand with habitat fragmentation, obviously. Also mortality from agricultural and sometimes silvicultural machinery, and some additional threats such as collection. It's a growing threat, collection for the pet trade, and elevated nest predation, which can be an issue in some areas and not always in others. So we'll get into, maybe we want to talk about a couple of these threats, and probably not get into too much detail on all of them. So collection is one I wanted to make sure I touched on with all of you, since probably many of you might not be aware that it's a threat to turtle species found here in Maine and in the Northeast. Wood turtle is indeed one of the most sought after turtle species in North America by collectors. There's a domestic trade in this species, but there's a really big international trade, and a lot of wood turtles that are collected end up being smuggled out of the country and sold to markets in Asia and Europe. We've seen increases in the value of wood turtles on the black market and increasing number of cases being prosecuted where wildlife traffickers are being caught with dozens of wood turtles, and also international seizures where many wood turtles are showing up in, say, Hong Kong. And they're coming from wild populations in the Northeast US and potentially Canada. So as many of you are kind of the boots on the ground to a degree out where you have your land holdings, being aware of this is I think a really good thing. And if you do ever see any activity that might be suspicious where it seems like people could be collecting turtles, or there's people that are doing something weird in some wood turtle habitat, it's definitely worth reaching out. Maine, you can reach out directly to me or to the Warden Service, and then to other state wildlife officials and wildlife law enforcement and Fish and Wildlife Service law enforcement as well, in your own areas. And I guess the other thing I wanted to touch on was maybe a little bit about the roadkill and fragmentation. So almost all wood turtle sites have some kind of roads, and obviously the busier the road, the worse it can be. But even a pretty low traffic road, such as some of the kind of main artery roads in the North Maine woods, even those we see some wood turtle mortality on them, and kind of compounded to a degree because we see some wood turtles, female wood turtles, that like to nest on roadsides, and so they're attracted to roads, gravel roads in particular. So moving on from threats, I just wanted to touch on the status of wood turtles. Here in Maine, they're a state species of special concern, so they're not listed under our State Endangered Species Act. Other states in the US have them listed variously as special concern, sometimes endangered, sometimes threatened. Currently, they don't have a federal status, but as Tony mentioned, they're being reviewed for consideration under the Federal Endangered Species Act. In Canada, they are federally endangered, and the IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the global body that tracks wildlife, lists them as endangered. So the remainder of my presentation here is just going to focus on wood turtle habitat to give you all, I hope, a pretty good sense of what it looks like, because streams and rivers in the forest is a really big category and includes lots and lots of thousands of miles here in Maine and many more elsewhere, and not all of it is really wood turtle habitat. So the substrate is really important. Sand, gravel, and cobble substrates, particularly things that are more on the sand and gravel, but in reality, you're always going to have some mix of those things. So if a stream system is slower and low in grade and is silty and mucky, it's really not good wood turtle habitat. It doesn't mean that wood turtles might not occur in that stream system, but that particular stretch, if it's really predominantly silty and mucky, is not really going to have many or any wood turtles. By the same token, the other end of the spectrum, if it's a steep grade mountain stream with water cascading over boulders, it's also not wood turtle habitat. It's just too steep and high grade. It's something kind of in the middle. And some of the hallmarks I have listed here of what I think are good things to look out for wood turtle habitat are, it usually has meandering stream channels. So you have these kind of serpentine shaped streams, a lot of bends, and oxbows, and floodplain areas. You're also going to have point bars and beaches that are sand or gravel, usually with open canopies, and some areas that are vegetated, some areas that are not so vegetated. But oftentimes there's a good component of open canopy, but with a lot of shrub and herbaceous vegetation that gets subjected every year to flooding. And in places like northern Maine, also ice scour is important for maintaining this. And really, they're also, wood turtles are found typically in really dynamic stream systems. So where you do have a lot of sand and gravel sediment being transported through the system every year and being deposited on the floodplain, on beaches and bars and islands. We also often have beaver activity and addition of trees and log jams that might, between the beavers and the flooding and all that, you get stream channels shifting, you get new beaches being formed, you get a point after a few years sometimes becomes an island and the stream totally jumps over. These really dynamic systems are important for maintaining a lot of the habitat structure they like, and then especially the nesting habitat. So mostly from now on, it's going to be photos, I think, and just to give you a good sense of what it looks like. So here's some idyllic northern Maine wood turtle habitat. You've got a really sandy river here. You've got, it's hard to totally see, but there's a nice potential nesting site, a beach right in the foreground. You're in that forested context. And then the surrounding areas just outside the stream, you have herbaceous and shrubby areas that get a lot of sunlight. You've got deep pools with woody structure and logs. These are places where the wood turtles will hide. They overwinter in deep sheltered pools where they're not going to be flushed out during spring high waters. Here's some more wood turtle habitat. You've got all that woody structure. You've got those, you can see it's not you don't have trees closing over the stream and shading things out. So even in the summertime, when when the leaves are all on, this is obviously an autumn photo. You've still got sun, and there's that herbaceous open canopy areas. You can see gravel cobble bars kind of in the background there. Here's another really beautiful wood turtle site. Here you can really get a good look at kind of the floodplain area. This is more early spring. You've got a lot of alders there. Haven't yet leafed out totally. But you can see that there's big areas of open canopy that are going to grow up and be primarily herbaceous here, but also shrubby areas. You can also see like the role at a site like this that beavers play, where they build these impoundments, and then waters get high after when snow melts or when there's big rain events. And over the time when the beavers are building these impoundments, you may have your stream jump to a new channel or into an old channel, and it just makes for this really dynamic environment. And if you go back to a site like this year after year, it's going to look a little different every year and be shifting and always kind of opening things up. Another role the beavers play too is they they're taking down a lot of trees and alders and things like that. And so they're also maintaining open canopy areas and these small patches that the wood turtles utilize. Here's an example of some wood turtle habitat on a much larger river, where you have kind of way out in the background, you can see the main channel here. And then in the foreground, you have some islands that are primarily herbaceous vegetation with also some shrubs, and then some kind of side channels. It's like a braided island complex on a big river. And so here the wood turtles are kind of more using these side channels, which are almost acting like small rivers in themselves. And then again, it's all in this forested context, which is really important. So some aerial images of what wood turtle habitat looks like. So here, you can see that serpentine shape, that meandering stream channel, and it's kind of cuts through a low-lying floodplain here that's mostly shown in that mostly looks brown. It's a lot of deciduous things like alder. You can also see some beaches, some point bars, and so that's some nice nesting habitat, right? In-stream nesting habitat. The turtles don't need to travel far. So I can also see off on the left side, there's a little kind of dead end of a logging road, that maybe a sandy log landing there. And then I see kind of down in the lower right corner, looks like another small log landing. Those areas might also be used by the wood turtles, but and they're in a situation like this where there's nice in-stream nesting habitat that's primarily going to be using that. There's why they wouldn't use anything that's available within a reasonable distance of the stream. Moving on, here's another site where you can see the meandering channel and kind of braiding multi-channels here, in a low-lying floodplain forest. Are really kind of clear here. This is a really dynamic system where stream channels are shifting constantly, and there are beavers involved. There's spring flooding, but you can see a lot of nesting habitat. You can see a lot of stream habitat in a forested area, and it's kind of, I like this shot too because it's kind of bookended on either end of the stream. A bigger, straighter channel, which is wood turtles will still utilize these areas, but it's not as important as these more complex habitat areas like at the center of this shot. Zooming in a little closer on that same site, just to kind of see some of what's going on there. But yeah, you've got all these different stream channels. It's always changing. You've got some nice nesting habitat, and you can see a little logging road down at the southern end there too. Here's another site. Hopefully there's some common themes you're seeing in all of these that tie them together. But another site where you have, I like this shot because you can really see the former stream channels, the oxbows. So you can imagine over time, if you had an image of this river every year over, say, 50 years or something, you would see that river channel migrate throughout this low, big sand gravel deposit. And it's always the disturbance that's causing is creating habitat for wood turtles, and all the sediment, the sand and gravel that's coming downstream and getting deposited on this lower grade area from the higher grade parts of the stream is nourishing that nesting habitat with new sand and gravel every year. Here's another kind of close up of that same site, and you can see, behind those beaches, those nesting beaches, it doesn't go immediately to mature forest. You've got this herbaceous and scrubby shrub vegetation habitat. The turtles make heavy use of those areas. And then you do have another logging road parallel to the stream here. And then one more aerial shot here. This is a large river system where you've got braided channels and islands, and a lot of open canopy habitat on these islands, and some big sand and gravel bars for nesting, all in this big industrial forest context. And then here's a couple of shots that Henning was able to get with the drone, These are really cool. Thank you, Henning. Kind of give you another bird's eye view of some wood turtle habitat. So I like this one because you kind of have all the ingredients here. You got that clear, it's clearly a gravel sand substrate stream that's fairly low in grade. You've got a nice nesting beach right in the middle with kind of multiple parts of the nesting beach. Anywhere where you see sand, that's where it's a little bit above kind of the summer high water mark, I guess, is potentially nesting habitat. And you've got a lot of mature forest around here, but you've got that scrubby vegetation too, right behind the nesting beaches. So there's a lot of opportunities for thermoregulation. There's another shot at the same site where you can see also some of the forest management activity that's going on. There's a patch cut off to the right, and you've got skidder trail or partial harvest there in the center, and then your wood turtle stream on the left side. A few more shots here is kind of what it might look like when you're out there in some of this shrubby herbaceous area around a wood turtle stream. It can be quite dense and hard to find turtles once it grows up. Turtles might be right at your feet down under the ostrich ferns. And they really like this floodplain habitat. There's a lot of different things they can eat. They can thermoregulate. Just another shot of some more pretty wood turtle habitat early in the fall, when turtles are often found more in the water than in the uplands. And then one more of another beautiful wood turtle site. But just you can kind of see all the ingredients in this photo too when you start looking at it through that lens of wood turtle habitat. And I've just got a few photos here of some nice in-stream nesting habitat. And here's a nice predominantly sand beach. You can see all the trees that have washed down from the higher grade parts of this river and piled up here where it becomes a lower grade system, and all that sand gets deposited every year and just makes for this really nice nesting habitat in a little opening without trees. And here's some nesting habitat that's a area where a stream channel shifted, I think due to beaver activity from what I could tell. And so this stream actually looks like maybe even only the year before I was out there was flowing predominantly through this area, and then mostly it had switched over to a whole new channel through this and just plowed right through this huge alder thicket. And so in the short term, before this grows up entirely, it made some really nice nesting habitat. And then one more shot of a nesting beach. You can see it's above the water. That kind of height of the nesting beach is important because it means that the nests aren't going to be flooded regularly anyway. And I'll end on this slide of just another shot of a beautiful northern Maine wood turtle site with all those habitat ingredients. And I'll go ahead and end there.
Thank you, Derek. Excellent presentation. I really have a good feel for of wood turtle habitat, even more so now with those great shots and discussion around what to sort of key in on, and obviously a very interesting life history. We had one question before we move to Phillip. We had one question from the group on the call today for you, Derek, about will wood turtles nest in the floodplain, or do they seek out more suitable nesting sites above the floodplain as a way to make sure their nests stay dry during occasional summer floods?
Yeah, good question. So they will nest in the floodplain. And I think a couple of those last few photos I showed of nesting habitat, these are sandbars or beaches that are right there on the edge of the river. But the turtles are selecting kind of the highest sandbars and beaches that certainly in the early spring, these are completely underwater. That water is depositing all the sand and gravel there. But during the summer months, these kind of higher elevation, a meter or two above the probably average water level in the summer when the eggs are incubating, are not regularly inundated. They may be briefly inundated when there's, say, a heavy rainfall event and you have a brief kind of rise and fall of the water, but the eggs can typically survive that. So the turtles they're definitely nesting in the floodplain area. But that being said, they'll also go far away from the river. They'll go nest on a gravel road shoulder or a sand pit nearby that can be well out of the floodplain. But the in-stream nesting habitat is always in the floodplain and is usually present at kind of the most robust wood turtle sites.
Good. Thanks for describing that. Let's move on to Phillip DeMaynadier, who will talk a little bit more about forest management practices and recommendations.
Thank you, Henning. Thank you, Derek. Everybody can hear me? Just give me a thumbs up. Very good. Yeah, so I thought what I'd do is just wrap up this section that Derek and I have with some forest management recommendations, so thinking about the biology and the behavior and the movements, seasonality of wood turtles that Derek has painted for us, and the habitats that they use. We thought it would be relevant for this workshop to talk about what are some of the things we could think about in managing the forest next to known wood turtle habitats. Let's see if I can move this along. There we go. So yeah, the habitat management recommendations that I'll be sharing they're partly a product of what Derek and myself and other biologists have observed and noticed here in Maine, but probably more importantly, they're really a consensus product of the whole Northeastern Wood Turtle Working Group, a group that's been around now for over 10 years, and that started because of the concerns range wide for wood turtles, and what started as anecdotal declines and has now really been well documented as significant population declines throughout much of their range. And that working group focused initially on putting together a status assessment of the wood turtle throughout the northeastern US, and then graduated to getting into some more concrete conservation and recovery measures and management recommendations. And they've produced some habitat management guidelines for different land use settings, agriculture, transportation, forestry. So that's what I'll be drawing on largely and sharing today. So, and just before that, just want to point out that there are, what are we trying to address? What are potentially some of the concerns biologically, and some of the threats that Derek highlighted that we might want to keep in mind as we think about forest management, and then also recognize that there's some real opportunities and benefits associated with forest management as well. So some of the potential concerns, for example, Derek talked about the issue of illegal collection and roadkill, and both of these issues can be exacerbated by having roads or trails that are very closely or located proximal to high quality wood turtle streams. Not so much because of the silvicultural activity that takes place on those roads, but at least as much the incidental recreational activity. So, the fishermen, the campers, et cetera, that come and use those roads, and when you're not using them for logging, which can contribute to roadkill. But it also provides a corridor for collectors that either, even just incidentally, unknowingly harming the wood turtles by collecting one or two specimens or more insidious collection that is part of the illegal pet trade. The other thing to consider is just this whole seasonality issue of the wood turtle use of the riparian zone next to the stream is really, really probably the most important issue that we're concerned about from a forest management perspective, and that's the potential to crush animals with heavy machinery during those high activity periods when they're near the stream and out of the stream. We know this occurs in agricultural settings quite often. There's a lot of documentation for that in the Northeast, and there's no reason why that couldn't and wouldn't also happen in a forest management setting. And indeed, we have actually documented a crushed wood turtle in a skidder trail in Sabumic Township not very long ago. So that's a concern. Derek talked about how dynamic and important that near riparian zone is to the stream corridor. So we just want to pay attention to sort of forest floor and stream bank integrity as we get very close to the stream. And then a lot of the woody inputs, that we're interested in as foresters and silviculturalists are also valuable to the wood turtles when they're left to fall into the stream, similar to what we heard about earlier this morning with fish. And it's, they create debris dams, plunge pools where these animals will overwinter, and valuable basking sites and hiding sites. So structural complexity is created in part by the large woody material that can fall into the stream from the riparian zone. And then another concern in some settings is invasive plants. And this is particularly problematic in floodplain settings where wood turtles obviously are present. You've probably noticed that there's a lot of Japanese knotweed, purple loosestrife, coltsfoot, buckthorn, barberry, some of the bad guys that often accumulate in floodplain settings, but just because of the constant raining seed source that comes downstream. And if we can avoid adding to that or increasing the foothold of invasive plants through careful forest floor management activities, that can be beneficial. Sorry, but the light goes out when I sit still for too long. But let's also recognize there's some valuable opportunities for forest management. Derek mentioned being vigilant, and there's two reasons for that. You guys are in remote areas and are likely to run into wood turtles on some streams in places that we don't have any documentation or very little. And it would be great if you sent a photograph to us just to help further our knowledge about their distribution in Maine and elsewhere, but also to keep an eye out for potential illegal trade and collection, suspicious activity around nesting beaches in June, or just, near that, May, June, July period, when turtles are getting ready to or still lingering near nesting beaches can be a really vulnerable time for them. Another opportunity is the very activity that you're involved with harvesting wood. These turtles, as Derek pointed out, will use early successional openings for foraging and basking. And they like an interplay often of canopy and early successional openings both. And so there's that opportunity, and they will move a long distance. And so those early successional openings, even if they're quite a distance from the stream, can be and will be accessed by the wood turtles. Nesting site creation and enhancement is an opportunity in some settings. So for example, if you have, say, some semi-permanent log landings or intensive log landing areas, or borrow pits that may have been used for road creation, those sort of more enduring features, if they have a sand and gravel component to them, like Derek said, We do have specific best management practices for how to enhance and maintain nesting habitat for wood turtles that can be shared with you if that seems like an opportunity that exists at your site. So please be in communication about that. And I just want to sort of recognize perhaps the obvious here, which is that wood turtles are a creature of forest watersheds and forest landscapes, and outside of conservation ownership, sustainably managed forests are one of the primary ways we can ensure that forests stay as forests. So we're very appreciative of the activities of forest management community and the opportunities that affords for benefiting wood turtles. So here's some of the management guidelines that both Maine Fish and Wildlife and the Northeastern Wood Turtle Working Group have put together. So before actually talking about the specifics, just a word about extent. So we're talking here again about relatively narrow zone next to the stream where that gets really a disproportionate amount of wood turtle use when they're not hibernating in the stream or traveling in the stream. They're often in this zone of about 300 feet adjacent to the stream. They'll certainly go a lot further than that. There's people on this very call on this meeting that have done wood turtle telemetry work documenting turtles well beyond a kilometer from the edge of a stream, and even right here in Maine. But trying to be reasonable and operational and practical here. A large majority of the turtles are spending a good amount of their time when they're out of the stream within this zone, within 300 feet of the stream. And then keep in mind as well that these animals are using the stream to travel up and downstream. There's been telemetry work done right here in Maine by Brad Compton to show that in his work about the average linear extent of stream corridor used by individual wood turtles was 2 miles. And again, they will use more than that. And there's been other work throughout the Northeast to document this as well. But the point being just that it's not just a point location. It's you need to think about linear extent of stream to accommodate the home range of these species, and then the riparian zone. And then for activities within the riparian management zone, probably the most important point here that's in bold is the one you really want to focus on, if nothing else, and that is that, again, as Derek pointed out, these animals are active from April through October, and trying to hone that a little bit for Maine, and especially the North Woods of Maine. If you can avoid the April 15th to October 15th window of operations when working within 300 feet of a known or suspected wood turtle stream, that could be really beneficial, because even very limited adult mortality, just the crushing of one or a few individuals, can have very strong impacts on the population for the demographic reasons that Derek pointed out, just how important adult survivorship is. So that often lends itself to harvesting during dry or frozen ground conditions, which is ideal. And then it's also recommended that you limit any harvest activity to outside of that very near ribbon next to the shoreline itself, 50 feet or beyond. And that's not to say that a closed mature canopy is necessary within 50 feet of the shoreline. We know that's not the case, in fact, but it's because these animals, especially in the shoulder seasons of April and October, they can still be moving in and out of the stream for short distances to bask on the banks nearby. And also, as Derek's habitat slides have pointed out, these tend to be really dynamic systems where there's a lot of dynamism in that area close to the stream corridor. flooding events and oxbow channeling and debris dams, and it's also where you're going to get a lot of your coarse woody debris recruitment is in the near shore area that will help contribute to that structural complexity. Beyond that, it's really just doing what you're already doing in most cases. As I look at the statewide standards and LUPC standards for, at least for PSL 1s, which we'll be hearing more about in the next presentation. And that is just to maintain a partial canopy cover within 300 feet of the shoreline. We don't particularly have any specific, more prescriptive guidance on that, but just trying to avoid whole-scale intensive clear cutting or plantation or stand conversion management in that 300-foot zone, but otherwise partial cutting is perfectly compatible with wood turtle habitat. Employing Maine Forest Service best management practices for stream crossings and culvert installations. This is for the tributary streams that are draining into the main overwintering stream of the wood turtle. So where those intersect the 300-foot zone and where your crossings intersect that zone, becomes particularly important. And then finally, to minimize the construction of permanent logging roads within that 300-foot zone, and actually to consider, and this is the one area where we're thinking about well beyond 300 feet, but in some strategic locations where you have a well-improved logging road that goes for long linear extents parallel to a known or confirmed wood turtle stream. This is where we become more worried about roadkill and about illegal or potentially illegal collection accessibility. And so if there's an opportunity to discontinue those logging roads through berms or culvert removals, gating or boulders, that kind of a thing, that certainly doesn't need to happen in all settings. But Derek shared a couple of slides where you may have noticed long linear stretches of logging roads paralleling the river, and those would be places where this could be really, really important because it only takes one person doing the wrong thing during, especially during nesting season, where a lot of damage could be done to the population. And then I'll just wrap up by pointing out that we're talking about wood turtles here today and earlier fish, but keep in mind that these riparian areas on these mid-order streams are some of the most valuable wildlife habitat that we have in Maine, and especially for several other at-risk species. So these species that I've listed here are some of the species in Maine. Actually, it's a pretty comprehensive list by my accounting of the endangered, threatened, or special concern riparian associated species in Maine that that tend to share wood turtle habitat, that also like some of the same characteristics of streams and rivers that wood turtles hone in on. And so, applying these habitat management guidelines and some of the other opportunities that we're talking about here is likely to be beneficial to many more species than just wood turtles, of course. So I think that's it. Yeah, I just want to again recognize the Northeastern Wood Turtle Working Group for their contributions to the habitat management guidelines, and to you and to the participants here today, and to the sponsors, the workshop sponsors that helped pull together. It's been quite a long time coming. We'd hope to do this in person and on site, but I think this is still a fruitful discussion. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Phillip. And a few questions have come in as folks are thinking about wood turtles, but I'm going to hold on to those questions until our open session to keep us on time. And now we're going to turn to Ben Kamps, forester with Weyerhaeuser, to give us a little quick 101 on Maine's stream regulations as they pertain mainly to the larger order streams where we can expect to find wood turtles. And for those, I know there's a few folks on the call from other states in the wood turtle range, and you'll have to try to equate these stream regulations you're going to hear about now to those in your states. But Ben, please take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Henning, and good morning, everyone. As Henning mentioned, my name is Ben Kamps. I'm the planning manager for Weyerhaeuser here in New England. And as Henning mentioned, just going to take the next few minutes to walk through at a high level some of the stream side management regulations that are in place across the state. This is in a goal to help facilitate the discussion a little bit later on as we look at some of the habitat considerations of the wood turtle paired up with the neighboring forest management. So just a quick overview. I'm going to review some of the management jurisdictions. We have a number of those across the state, then get into some of the specifics of the stream orders, pair that up to some of the potential habitat that Derek shared, and then walk through some examples of specific timber harvesting standards. So with that, first things first, we have the management jurisdictions across the state. So probably most of you are aware, there's a number of different management zoning jurisdictions across the state of Maine. The map there shows really three primary ones. The first one, LUPC, or Glyptemys, is a plan use planning commission. This is typically the unorganized territories, predominantly forest management, timber company owned. Next, there's statewide standards shown in the blue there on the map. These are more of your organized towns, and the guidelines are managed by the Maine Forest Service. And then finally, the third one, and I won't spend a lot of time on this one today, but is the DEP, or the local ordinance, which is zoning above and beyond what is in place for, say, the statewide standards. So with that, before we get into the details on the actual forest management recommendations, just to calibrate everyone on the various stream orders, we really have two major distinctions that we'll be talking about today. And this graphic here is from the Maine Forest Service, and it really shows a simplified drainage basis. So up on the upper left here, you see this is basically your headwaters of the stream. So picture a small spring or ephemeral type intermittent leading down to more of a perennial, larger order stream up to the point where it starts to drain 300 acres or more when you think about a drainage basin. So the Land Use Planning Commission nomenclature for this is a PSL2. That stands for protected shoreland, and the 2 is a size classification. And there's actually 2 PSL2 categories, those that drain less than and those that drain more than 300 acres. So we move down into those here. These are becoming larger order streams up to the point where it starts to drain as a watershed more than 25 square miles. And these are known as PSL1s. And for the most part, this area in here in the larger order stream seems to be the most likely wood turtle habitat, at least looking at Derek's photos from earlier. So another way to look at this, again, we have the unmapped, the PSL2s, all the way up to the PSL1s, just to give everybody a different view of this. This photo right here is a PSL2 draining more than 300 acres, so that larger order PSL2, and then over here is a PSL1, more of the river type. This is actually the Dead River in the Bowtown.
Ben, can I interrupt you and ask you to just perhaps clear your mic area? Your audio is going in and out occasionally.
All right, is that any better?
That's great right there.
Okay. All right.
Thanks.
So moving on, when we look specifically at the timber harvesting standards, when considering PSL2s and PSL1s, going to focus just on PSL2s above the 300 acres in size. So these are the larger order streams. And for the sake of simplicity, today I'm going to look at the middle ground in terms of regulations between LUPC and statewide standards. So they do differ depending on which township and which zoning you are in. But today I'm going to look at what they share in common. So for the PSL2s, so the smaller order ones, there's a 25-foot minimum filter strip guidelines. So this follows BMPs for increased slope. So 25 feet back from the normal high water mark if it's flat ground. And then obviously this increases as the slope increases. And within this, retain significant vegetation to maintain stream shading, no slash in the channel, and then avoid scarification and sedimentation. Those are the current guidelines in place, and those are the minimum guidelines. Statewide standards is a little bit more setback requirements than LUPC, but again, these are the very minimal that are in place across the state. The photos below there just show some examples of this on the ground. The one on the left here, you can see the filter strip. There is some management going on in there, but the slash is pulled back. Nothing scarified in the forest floor here. And then this one here shows kind of the overall watershed where you see oftentimes what's referred to as a smart buffer, where as the stream order size increases and the terrain perhaps increases, the buffer width gets larger and larger. So moving on to PSL1s, again, these are the larger order streams. Typically, these are the more river type areas. Again, looking at the common ground between LUPC and statewide standards. For these order streams, there's a 250-foot shoreland area measured from the normal high water mark of the stream. And within this area, a couple different things going on when it comes to timber management regulations. So the first is a minimum 50-foot setback for no cleared openings or slash accumulation. So this is actually 75 feet for statewide standards, but again, 50 foot is the minimum by LUPC standards. Within this area, no more than 40% removal of standing volume in any 10-year period. And from the area from the 50-foot mark to the 250-foot mark, no canopy openings can be greater than 14,000 square feet. And there's also some regulations about limiting the size of other openings to not exceed 10,000 square feet within 100 feet. So essentially keeping the canopy as intact as possible, limiting the overall amount of volume removal over a 10-year period. And a couple photos there show kind of what this looks like on the ground. So you can see the one on the left shows the 40% removal, what that looks like on the ground. So this would probably be in that 250 foot zone. And then this one here actually was in Derek's presentation showing what an overview looks like from above. So given some of the potential complexities with this and given the various jurisdictions and the various orders and classifications of the brooks or the shoreland area, I thought it may be beneficial to walk through just a quick example for folks of planning or setting up a potential timber harvest in a PSL1 zone. So for the next couple minutes, we'll just pretend we're attempting to set up and plan a timber harvest here. And the tract of timber that we're looking at is in Bowtown Township. So this is managed by the LUPC. And the stream that we're seeing there is a PSL1. This is the Dead River. Saw this in the photo a little bit earlier. And let's say we would like to harvest this area here and are exploring the potential to harvest some timber in this adjacent stand to the stream. So the likely way in which we would do this would be first to get a digitized line of the high water mark. So I've created a map here showing where that would be. I've zoomed into the river edge. So we have our water feature here. Typically, the high water mark is right along the edge, obviously, and this needs to be oftentimes verified on the ground. It's worth noting that any wetland feature that's immediately adjacent to a PSL1, the 250 zone starts at the edge of the wetland and not at the normal high water mark. In this case, it's a very defined bed and bank. So we have a 50-foot buffer off of that bed and bank. This is the area where there's no clear openings and no large slash accumulation. From there, the next 200 feet out to 250 feet from the normal high water mark, that becomes our shoreland area zone by LUPSI and statewide standards if we were within a statewide standards town. And from that point beyond, from the normal high water mark, is general management. So typically in a harvest activity, what would occur is after we establish where that normal high water mark is, we then build in a buffer for the 50-foot setback area, so we know where that is. And then we place a line in on the ground at the 250-foot mark from the normal high water mark. Typically, we give ourselves a 30 to 50-foot buffer just because of GPS variation, just to ensure that we are well, in fact, away from the 250 line. And then in order to manage the 40% removal requirements and to make sure that we don't exceed the canopy size, oftentimes we'll lay out trails or establish some type of marking within this zone for the timber harvesting activities to occur so that we can track those on a volume removal basis, and again, avoid exceeding the canopy opening size requirements. In terms of timing, oftentimes these harvests are looked at as higher risk. Obviously, you have the proximity to the stream that you need to be taken into consideration. So they do occur in the winter months, or they can occur in the summer months. And that may be something we can discuss in a couple minutes in terms of harvest timing, looking specifically at some of the recommendations that Phillip had in his earlier slides. But for the most part, these are happening outside of the wet period, so the fall and or the spring months, which are typically the highest risk months when it comes to heavy rainfall or wet soil conditions. So with that, just a quick overview of some of the jurisdictions and stream orders and the timber management regulations. Most of this is regulated by the Maine Forest Service. So I provided some additional resources here if anyone would like additional sources specific to either statewide or LUPSI standards. And if time allows, be happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions for Ben here before we transition to the next section? Another question or two did come in, and I'm collecting those, and I'm going to save those for our open session. I think they'll be good to start that off. Thank you, Ben, for that description of Maine forest management stream regulations and some examples of how they are carried out. I think that gives us some excellent information combined, like you said, with the ecology discussions earlier to set up our brainstorming session here in a little bit, looking at opportunities. But before we reach that, one other opportunity to consider are science gaps and filling that with more science, with research, etc. And so we've asked a few folks who are doing wood turtle research to provide us a brief update. I know much of their work is in progress, so they probably can't talk too much about results, but they can tease us with some of the questions that they are working on. And so I'd like to turn to Christopher Edge out of New Brunswick and ask if you might start us off with a little discussion of your work, Chris.
Yeah, sure thing. Just want to know, are my get going. Are my slides up now?
Not yet.
Okay. Oh, I see what I didn't do. I need to actually share the screen, not just click it.
Here we go.
Did that give you the presenter view, or do you have the actual slides?
No, that gave us presenter view and it looks great.
Looks good. Okay. So I'll give you a really quick update on a research project that is ongoing in New Brunswick. So I'm Chris Edge. I'm a research scientist here with the Canadian Forest Service and Atlantic Forestry Center. And it was a great update so far because I don't have to tell you anything about the biology of wood turtles or how they use the landscape. We can dive right into to what the project is looking at. So in Canada, the species is listed as endangered, and across the species range, the threat that would occur in the highest percentage of the species range would be forestry. So there's been forestry activity within about at least, well, approximately 50% of the species range in Canada, which makes it a very widespread threat to the species. But the issue that has come up is that we don't know what the magnitude of that threat is. And now, as the wood turtle is an endangered species, in Canada, the way that habitat is regulated for endangered species is something called critical habitat is defined. And then within that critical habitat, there are restrictions placed upon what activities can occur. So within wood turtle range in Canada, the critical habitat definition is a 200-meter buffer on all inhabited streams. So that's 200 meters buffered, and then the buffer would extend 200 meters above and below, or sorry, 2 kilometers above and below observations within streams. So that's a significant portion of the upland forest, and it's greater than the distances that have been talked about earlier. So, 25 feet for this or 90 feet for other things that are occurring within Maine and parts of the US. So it's a significant area. If we map that, so this project occurs on CFB Gagetown, and so that's a map of all of the known critical habitat for the species on base Gagetown in the green area. So CFB Gagetowns are about 1,000 square kilometers, so 420 square miles, but 100,000 hectares. And so the area that we have outlined here, the watersheds, is about 25,000 hectares. And critical habitat would include about 30 to 40% of that terrestrial land when it's defined under the recovery strategy. So that's a significant portion of lands that will be used. And within this restriction, within this critical habitat, the current restriction that could be placed on forestry activities would be no harvest greater than 1 hectare in size, and restrict harvesting to the winter months. So it's a significant area that would be protected, and forestry activities would be significantly reduced within these areas. Now at CFS and other areas, we've seen this as an opportunity to maybe look at forestry as a way to manage the habitat for the species, if we can both minimize or mitigate any risks, and then possibly look at how it can be used to regenerate the forest. So the project that we're looking at is a response to forest harvest. So we started 2 years ago, we started a 4-year before-after impact study that has 2 years of data collected before harvest and then 2 years collected post-harvest. We just finished the 2nd year of that pre-harvest data collection. So the way the study is set up is we have 10 harvest blocks located within a study area where we know there are wood turtles. And those harvest blocks will be harvested this winter when the animals are overwintering the streams. And we've been collecting both telemetry and GPS telemetry data for the past 2 years, and we'll continue doing that in the future, as well as both micro and macro habitat features. So we've got 20 female wood turtles in this area right now, outfitted with both radio telemetry and GPS telemetry. So that radio telemetry allows us to locate individuals, and about every 3 to 4 days. And the GPS telemetry is getting fixes about every 4 hours. So we're getting very detailed habitat use for these animals. When we map that up on our study area, this is just data from about 10 turtles, and it's not complete for this year. So we know that of our 10 harvest blocks, 8 of them, turtles are interacting with them in some way. And 75% of the females interact with one of our proposed harvest blocks in some way. So we'll likely get the design that we want, where we have the before data on the unharvested landscape and then the after data consisting of the harvest has occurred where animals may in fact use that landscape. So we're using the telemetry data to get movement data, so we can look at movement parameters before and after harvest, and as well as LiDAR data and orthophotographs to look at habitat data. So this is just one of the LiDAR metrics, so it's just canopy density at a 2 meters resolution. And if we overlay the points on that, you can see there's a very clear association between the more open canopy areas and the wood turtle locations. So our LiDAR data is available. I think it's 2018 was the last time it was flown. And the study area will be flown again post-harvest at some point. So we'll be able to calculate the same metrics before and after harvest. And the whole intent of this study is to look at how wood turtles are responding to forest harvest, and then to be able to use that recommendation for managing habitats at big, broad, large spatial scales, and hopefully figure out a way that we can incorporate that into forest management planning for short and long term. And yeah, so I know I didn't get a lot of time, so I'll end there in case anybody has any questions. And I'll just put my contact information up if anybody wants to get in touch and talk about the study or other aspects related to wood turtles in Canada or in the US.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you. I did ask these folks to provide a brief update, a description of their work, and I sort of sense a second wood turtle workshop in our future as folks bring together some more information. And that looks like a very neat study, Chris. Very excited to see how that goes. So keep us in the loop, please. And I'd like to turn to Gary Roloff and Trish Brockman from the Michigan State University next. Folks who are a little bit outside our region, but doing some work as well on wood turtle, and I believe connected to the Wildlife Conservation Initiative. So not sure which one of you will be talking, but I will turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Henning, and thanks for the invite. And I promise we will be brief. We have very specific instructions from Henning to keep it short. For those of you that do not know me, I'm Gary Roloff. I'm a professor in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife at Michigan State University. And just this last year, we were fortunate enough to start a project under the Wildlife Conservation Initiative, specifically with 3 member companies of NAFO and the Nikazi Foundation, working in the Western Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And what Henning asked us to do is just briefly talk about what our goals and objectives are. And I'm going to turn that over to Trish Brockman, who does all the heavy lifting on this project. But then Henning also asked me to just briefly say a few words about data management, data sharing agreements that we needed to have in place to get this work started. So with that, Trish, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Gary. So, yep, my name is Trish Brockman. I'm a first year's master's student in the Applied Forest and Wildlife Ecology Lab in the Fisheries and Wildlife Department at Michigan State University. And so this project, of course, is a part of the partnership between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NAFO, partner with Nikazi for the Wildlife Conservation Initiative, focusing on wood turtles and managed landscapes. So obviously our focal species, one of them is the wood turtle. We're also looking at golden wing warbler occupancy in these sites, but for now we'll just focus on wood turtles. So our objectives for this project, what we're looking to determine the current occupancy status in river basins with historical wood turtle occupancy records. We're also looking to determine wood turtle occupancy in new basins. We're relating management history and drainage condition to wood turtle occupancy status in these basins. And we're also looking to produce some occupancy models that work with information that's easily collected either from remote sensing or standard forest inventory techniques. So like Gary said, our project is located in the western upper peninsula of Michigan. It's a pretty remote, heavily forested landscape, kind of crisscrossed by these streams and riparian areas. And so we've chosen 25 river basins, ranging anywhere between 10,000 to 37,000 acres.
Trish, this is Darren. I'm sorry to interrupt. Are you intending to share a screen?
Oh, so I don't have a presentation.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure.
That's okay. I'm just speaking for the project. All right, so anyway, we left off. So 25 river basins in the Western UP. They're large, remote, heavily forested. Typically anywhere between 14 and 89% ownership by these privately managed, privately owned management companies. And that is provides a great potential for these private companies to help with recovery of the species through best management practices in these areas. So what we're doing is we're going out, we're using a protocol that was developed by Donald Brown out of West Virginia University for monitoring wood turtle populations. So we're delineating river segments, 0.5 kilometer river segments that are overlapped by these lands that are managed by NAFO. And we create these transects from 0 to 45 meters from the riverbank along these 0.5 kilometer sections. And what we do is we walk along those doing visual encounter surveys, trying to locate wood turtles in these segments. And while we're doing that, we're also collecting information on vegetation structure and composition, stream and bank characteristics, and also human influences within these areas. So anything from culverts, roads, logging activity, and hopefully we can use this information to determine our detection probability, help build some occupancy models for use in other basins, and also to assess drainage condition and management history. So we got a little bit off to a late start this season, but our surveys are typically set in that early activity period when turtles are still close to the rivers. And that's early May through late June, though we'd like to extend those surveys through August to see how they're using these landscapes when they're kind of in these upland habitats and not as closely tied to the rivers. So the results we got from this summer, while we had kind of a shorter season, we did detect some wood turtles in some of our basins, and kind of looking forward to the 2021 season. So we'd like to really prioritize wood turtle surveys. We'd like to look into using eDNA to supplement our visual encounter surveys to help confirm occupancy in some of these rivers where perhaps it's not as easy to access them by foot for visual encounter surveys. So I saw Derek had some really nice pictures of these rivers with beautiful banks, sandy banks, and unfortunately a lot of our streams, because of the geomorphology of the region, are pretty emergent wetland. They're not as easily accessible for us. So by using river samples to look for wood turtle DNA, we might be able to confirm occupancy in some of these basins. And then we'd also like to employ some radiotelemetry, like in the previous talk, to see, one, to test our detection probabilities, so to see if we're actually able to find wood turtles on these landscapes, and also to see what they're doing in these upland habitats during the summer when we're not seeing them close to the rivers. So what are they doing? Are they using managed lands at all? How are they using them? And what kind of impacts that management has on their movements, behaviors, population status. And then we'd also like to see if we can look at age distributions to see what those populations look like. In the area, they tend to be pretty fragmented, smaller populations. So, you know, impacted by nest predation and whatnot. So we'd like to see exactly how viable those populations are. And then, so I'll kind of give this over to Gary to talk a little bit about our data handling.
Yep, thanks, Trish. Appreciate that. And so this was a pilot year on the project. So we spent a lot of the season learning, you know, honing in on some of our questions, as Trish indicated. And let me just say a few words about the agreement. I got to admit that working with the Nakazi Foundation to help manage and get the agreement through Michigan State University is really easy. And Darren, I appreciate Susan McCord and your staff for making that process easy. Our data management sharing agreement, I think reflects U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service data requirements mostly, in that we need to make the data collected and synthesized publicly available at the conclusion of the project, with, of course, access and use rights to Nakazi Foundation once the project is completed. Those products become available after a 30-day review period by Nakazi, by our partners. You know, so basically anything we produce, we'd run by Nakazi Foundation and our U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service liaison. And I think the only caveat there is, of course, we would fuzzy specific locations in any spatially explicit products, you know, so that we wouldn't divulge the specific locations of this uncommon species. Bottom line, with all that sharing and publicly available, the agreement states that MSU retains the intellectual property rights of the data. But again, it's a very sharing type of agreement that was able to get through both Nakazi Foundation review and MSU review. That got us up and running. So Henning, I hope that's kind of what you were looking for, maybe a little insight into how agreements might work in the Northeast.
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Trish, for the project description. And that's always a concern around with private landowners about data sharing and land access, and especially for a species, an at-risk species that's you know, in the petition category. So I thought that would be a helpful insight to folks here on the call. And we have a great history of collaboration also in Maine through the University of Maine and the Cooperative Forestry Research Unit. But Tricia, that's exciting work. It's going to be great to do some comparisons with work that's already been done with some of Chris's work. I'd love to hear about the potential use of eDNA, great new technology to understand you know, more landscape information and help surveys, help field work get more done. That's very interesting for a species like this. So good luck, and look forward to hearing more as more data comes out. I'd like to, and we can, you know, delve more into this here. I want to make sure we have enough time to have some open discussion. We do have some questions to go through, but I also wanted to ask, I know there's some Umbagog National Wildlife Refuge folks on the call, and I was wondering, Sean or Sierra, if you would like to update folks at all with any of your work? And perhaps that can also be covered in our open discussion. And Phillip, I think you had asked if you might update folks with some of State of Maine's work on wood turtles in terms of research. I'll turn the floor to you.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to briefly, since there is this little research update section, I just wanted to recognize a couple of projects that are ongoing in Maine. Dr. Matt Chatfield has done some really good work in central Maine, looking at using radio telemetry and mark recapture to get a handle on habitat use and movement biology of turtles in a somewhat different landscape setting, one that's got a little bit more human roads and agricultural intermixed with forest. And so that's been a really valuable study that's ongoing. Mike Jones and Liz Wiley have done some long-term demographic mark recapture work and population monitoring of some really stellar populations here in Maine, and that's ongoing. I just want to recognize that. And then with regard to environmental DNA, there's a study now underway at University of Maine, Orono, in Mike Kinnison's lab, where he has at least one student working on that question here in Maine and the use of that technology in stream settings. And Mike Kinnison's done really cutting edge work with eDNA for a whole lot of different taxa. But this will be, I think, his first effort to work with reptiles.
Excellent. I'll open the floor to any other research updates. There's folks on the call that I'm not familiar with, so just wanted to make sure that we give an opportunity for any others to inform us of any work going on. And if not, I'd like to move on. It's about noontime, so that gives us about a half an hour. And I'd like to just address a few questions that have come up, and then I'd like to kind of get to our important brainstorming session. But some of these I think are going to be for you, Derek and Phillip. One is description of hibernating sites. And can you describe features of what makes good hibernating sites? And question was also related to communal nesting sites or hibernating sites.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can describe that. So for wood turtles, hibernating sites are, as we said before, they're in the stream. They're deeper pools. It's not necessarily always like a classic pool, but a deep section of river that has a bottom that's not likely to be disturbed by really high, spring flows and scour from ice. So it's a sheltered pool, and it varies. They're a little bit hard to kind of predict exactly where they're going to be, and they're not, like I said, they're not always a pool, but they're deep in kind of sheltered area, and they are. Yeah, I'm not sure. They are often used by more than one turtle, so they are somewhat communal. So I don't know. I don't have like a great grasp on how many turtles in the population might be overwintering by themselves versus with others. But it's typically like the good overwintering areas are limited type of habitat within the stream.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. Yeah, if they find a good spot, they all want a room. Mm-hmm. So, and then one other question was about some of the work here in Canada has shown use of some of the smaller tributary streams. are there certain types? We talked, you had a lot of pictures of the larger order streams. Are there certain types of the tributary streams that are more important for them? What are they using those for? Do the habitat management guidelines address those smaller tributary streams?
Yeah, I think with those smaller tributary streams, you know, especially where you have a confluence where a smaller trib meets something more of what I mostly showed in my photos, that's an important area, and certainly turtles are going further up those tributaries, and I think usually it's when those tributaries are kind of just smaller versions of what we think of as typical wood turtle habitat, kind of like what I showed. So if they're sandy gravel substrate systems where turtles may find opportunities for foraging, you know, they may go up a stream, foraging in the stream, then move into the surrounding uplands and spend time there, and then come back to the stream. You can find them in some pretty small streams sometimes, but the really small stream habitat, they're not really found in those streams on their own. They're always connected, right, to these larger streams and rivers. I don't know if that completely answers the question.
Well, if the person who asked it, you know, please feel free to unmute and speak up if that didn't hit the spot. And then another question was about predator communities in Maine. How diverse are they, and are they different, these predator communities, potentially in managed landscapes versus unmanaged landscapes?
Yeah.
Do we know something about that?
We know a little bit. You know, there hasn't been any kind of dedicated study of this in Maine, but I'd say based on, there has been a lot of work on nest predation of turtles generally, and wood turtles in particular, and I've seen a number of presentations specific to wood turtles from work done all over the country. And then also based on some of my own observations from visiting a lot of wood turtle sites all around the state. The places where you see the most nest predation are places where you have the highest density of people on the landscape too. So at sites, you know, with wood turtles, at some of the sites that I've worked at in southern, southwestern Maine, central Maine, that are much more in a context that includes agricultural and residential lands, and you just have a lot more people around. You really do see, you know, you come to a nesting beach and it's not uncommon to see evidence of nest predation. So during the June nesting season, you'll see freshly excavated nests with eggshells scattered about. And we don't have any idea of kind of what the rates of nest predation are like in Maine. But by the same token, the work that I've done in kind of northern and northwestern Maine, kind of outside of where there are really many people living, I've seen very little evidence of nest predation, almost remarkably so, given that it can be really predominant in a lot of places. And these are in both, this goes for both managed forests and largely unmanaged forests. So it's hard to find any forests that aren't managed in some way, but you know, on preserves and in kind of the working forest context. Basically where there aren't many people, there's predator populations aren't subsidized, and it's primarily things like raccoons, skunks, foxes, even coyotes. These are the turtle nest predators. And so yeah, where you just don't have the same booming populations in areas outside of people for some of those species, and I don't have any any concrete numbers to back that up. I'd have to bring in someone from our mammal group.
Well, it sounds, thank you, Derek. It sounds like Trish might be looking a little bit at this question out there in the Lake States as part of her work, and I guess something that we can all keep in mind as we move forward. One other question that might be a good lead-in to our discussion on opportunities is how can a landowner, talking about here in Maine, find out about known wood turtle locations on their land? And so that's probably a request to you, Derek.
Yeah, yep, they can reach directly out to me, email or a phone call. But yeah, we have, there's lots of places where wood turtles surely occur that we don't have them documented. But I do a lot of in various reviews and scouting for sites to get out to and look for wood turtles. I do a lot of kind of desktop prospecting for wood turtle habitat. So I've done enough of it that we can screen habitat pretty quickly, like looking at the same aerial images like I showed in my presentation. But yeah, we don't publish locations for documented wood turtles, on the web because of the poaching concern, especially the collection concern. But we always share if someone reaches out, if a landowner, large or small, reaches out and wants to know if we have this species on our land or any rare species, we readily share that, and there's no issue there. We do it all the time.
Yeah, I know you, and I know in our discussions in planning the workshop, you've talked about in one of the sites that we were going to take all of us out to back in May, if we were doing this in person. I believe you found that using remote sensing and perhaps didn't have any known locations. So I guess my point there is, even if a landowner may not have any known sites, if they're interested in understanding which of their larger streams, small rivers, have potential, that's something that you can offer as well.
Definitely, yeah, and that's a good example, because you sent me a whole bunch of tracts of land to look at, and it didn't take me too long to go through all of them and pick out a few places that I said, hey, I'd be willing to bet we could find a wood turtle here. And it also has some recent forestry management on the site. So it's definitely something that I can do, and I'm happy to do it.
Well, great. Well, I do want to turn now to our sort of brainstorming session around conservation opportunities across all stakeholders. We've had a lot of different stakeholders on the call today, but with forest landowners particularly in mind. I would like to maybe just open the session up to anyone who would like to provide any comments. I have been taking a few notes and have a few ideas, but before jumping into that, I wanted to just kind of open and make sure that, in the interest of engaging more folks, are there others that might want to start this conversation off? So I'm going to open the floor right now. And if I don't hear anyone, I have a few ideas to, we talked about winter harvests and learned how, obviously that's a way to prevent or minimize the mortality issue, perhaps with logging equipment. I know in Maine that wintertime is, as Ben mentioned, is one of our highest seasons or timing of our operations, which makes a great fit for wood turtle ecology, a good match. And so maybe that's an opportunity out there where, just combined with our earlier discussion around, if a landowner is interested in contributing to wood turtle conservation, if they perhaps have some planned summertime dry season harvest near a potential wood turtle stream, they could, or some areas they don't know, they could contact IFNW. They could find out if that stream has potential, and perhaps plan that harvest activity for a frozen time of the year. So there's some opportunities like that that could be out there. Any thoughts from the group on that? Quiet bunch here today. The other thought,
with respect to winter harvest, I think it's like from a conservation point of view, it's probably one of the best ways to mitigate that risk of direct impact, especially with animals getting run over by, skidders or haul trucks and that type of thing. And, that seems to work relatively well for those direct threats. And I do think that it's, my understanding is that it's not too onerous for people to do. It's sort of an easy one that people, forest companies or local landowners could possibly take on.
Yeah, and the reason why I say it's a good match is often these larger rivers or larger streams, smaller rivers, they often have, like Ben Kamps mentioned, associated wetlands and floodplain areas and et cetera. And it's to make sure that we're implementing best management practices for water quality. It's a perfect time of the year to go in there when everything is frozen. You reduce so many risks. So like you said, it's some pretty low-hanging fruit right there. And then, back to road, other types of equipment mortality, something that was said earlier around, the roads and logging truck traffic. I wonder if there's some opportunity through the logger training programs to bring up the awareness to the folks that are in the woods when they come across a turtle. I think we've all come across a turtle on a road in our lives. It's we can see that. We know what that is when we see that out our front windshield. Maybe there's just some awareness to avoid those types of mortality events with the logging contract community. We have a training program set up already as part of state certification, logging certification programs. They often have wildlife components. It would be, I think, an easy ask for these training programs to sort of slide in some brief information on wood turtle and roads and how to avoid that and just to bring that awareness up. And then also the road closure issue is a tough one in Maine because of our tradition of the private land owners open their lands to the public. And, there's very little gating and blockage of roads. But again, combining information that we've learned today about the ecology of the turtles and the key stretches of certain rivers and streams that they're likely to inhabit, there could be potentially some targeted and focused road closures that are perhaps, spurs and aren't needed for, routine forest management on a frequent basis. Maybe they're not big connectors in sort of the network, and they make good candidates for some type of closure. Maybe it's a temporary closure during the summer season, keep them open during the fall hunting season sort of thing. But, that's something, it seems like some low-hanging fruit that we could explore as opportunities.
Henning is John Gilbert. Oh, sorry, Pat. Just to note, just for folks in Maine, if you're to draw a line sort of on latitude from Fulton across into New Brunswick, below that line, It's getting to the point where we don't even have the opportunity to freeze down roads. So a winter operation in those areas due to climate change only happens maybe 1 in 4 years now. So just saying, well, in the winter operation in these wet zones beside streams is a great time to do it. Actually, below that line, it's getting pretty tough to do.
That's a good point, John. Yeah, that's a good point. Pat, you had a thought?
Oh, just a comment in line with your thoughts on access, open access traditions in Maine, and was thinking it was interesting also to listen to Steve Koenig in the previous session talking about some of the woody additions and the public's reaction to it. And I think there are things we do for really good reasons that aren't always understood. And I'm feeling like it may be worthwhile if we pursue some of these things that we accompany it with some sort of communication strategy to go with it. Because I think if, at the very least, some signage, if you were to close out some of these roads for those purposes, that, we ought to have something that explains the why.
No, that's an excellent point. My company has started to close some roads that are sensitive to road traffic, from a road maintenance standpoint, and we've considered explaining why, a certain road might be gated temporarily during the spring mud season, for instance. So I think you're spot on with, figuring out how to bring the public up to speed. And I think, once they understand why we're doing that, I think they'll be on board. What else? Surveys, Derek and Phillip, I know you'd love to, have more information on wood turtles. Have you done any systematic surveys in certain parts of Maine? That was another question someone asked. Is that something that landowners might contribute to in terms of, allowing access for surveys, et cetera? How does that fit into your sort of, research program on wood turtles?
Yeah, I could answer that. Yeah, surveys for wood turtles, they've kind of happened in pulses based on funding, and particularly there's been some pushes that were part of this Northeast Wood Turtle Working Group. So it's possible that we may be entering another period of intensive wood turtle work in 2021, 2022, where more surveys would be happening. But yeah, access to sites where we could survey is always great. They're pretty under-surveyed in Maine relative to some other states. Maine is pretty big. We have a lot of forested streams and rivers. There aren't that many of us who are able to go out there and survey for turtles. So, and the efforts to do so by Inland Fisheries and Wildlife have really been just in the last 6 or so years, really intensively anyway. So
there was a question about your protocols. Can you, in a very brief manner, can you just give us a protocol description for your surveys? Sure.
Yeah, I usually cover that when I give wood turtle talks, but I was trying to be really laser focused. But anyway, happy to answer. We've used a protocol that was developed by the Northeastern Wood Turtle Working Group, where they're visual transect surveys, where typically 2 to 4 surveyors go out and survey in the stream and on the banks up to about 5 meters from the high water mark. We pre-delineate survey areas like Trish described in the survey she uses. We delineate 1 kilometer segments, and we spend an hour surveying each of those segments. and we search for wood turtles and record how many we find, and we also mark individual turtles for mark recapture. And there's kind of two tiers of the survey protocol. There's a rapid assessment where we try to return. We go to a site 3 times in a season to survey it, and that's kind of looking at occupancy and abundance. And then there's a demographic assessment or long-term assessment where we're actually trying to get out at least 6 times across multiple seasons, where we're trying to get a lot more data for purposes of long-term monitoring of that population. So you're actually getting a population estimate and learning a lot more about what parts of the site are used most heavily.
Thank you. Good stuff. There is a question about stream crossings, and we had a discussion about stream crossings in the field, as you recall, when we scoped out our workshop field site. And this Angie's asked about the banks. Is there evidence that, you know, creating the banks at stream crossings, are stream crossings a way that turtles get up onto roads, and are they a source of or facilitate vehicle collision mortality? We've also, I think, talked in the field there about stream crossings, you know, being a potential nesting area because of some banks that get exposed perhaps at a crossing. And then we also found out that the geotextile fabric that's sometimes used to stabilize the armoring or the abutments, we found out that over time, that's geotextile fabric, at least the one kind that we encountered, actually can cause a mortality event, or potentially by wrapping around the leg of a wood turtle as it gets exposed out of the substrate over time through scouring action. So a couple little things there to tease apart, but any thoughts from anyone there on stream crossing management, let's say, for wood turtles?
I can say a couple things. So when wood turtles are moving up and down the stream in the water, if they encounter like a perched culvert or kind of any obstacle that they're not able to just swim around or easily climb over, they will readily go up on the road and, you know, cross the road. And so there's always a risk of them getting struck in that situation. And then also we have seen in the North Maine woods, we've seen some locations where there's a wood turtle stream and there's a bridge or a culvert doesn't appear to be an obstacle in any way, especially a bridge is really not an obstacle to the turtles, but turtles are attracted to the road shoulders where they're nesting in the loose gravel on the sides of the road. You know, it has all the ingredients they're looking for. There's an open canopy, there's exposed sand and gravel, it's right next to the stream. From the turtle's perspective, it hits all the marks. So it's an area where I think there may be some opportunities for creative solutions to make that less hazardous to turtles. I have some ideas, and a couple of you we've chatted about this in the past, but it gets me thinking of another thing which you mentioned, Henning, which was with truckers, those, you know, transporting logs through the woods. Like that's one of the places where you're most likely to see a turtle on the road. So that could be, if there was an opportunity to give a little bit of like a one slide training on turtles and wood turtles on roads, you know, that'd be one of the places where that's where I look for turtles crossing the road when I'm up there.
Well, I'm sure Pat Sorois is taking some notes, given his leadership and involvement on training, logger training here in the state through the SFI implementation committee. So good thoughts. And the one other, I'm not sure if we've tackled everything there on crossings, but before I forget, one other item you mentioned a little bit in your presentation, Derek, but we also touched on in the field, is these old gravel pits or not old necessarily, but gravel pits that might be in proximity to a potential wood turtle water body. They are they're potential nesting habitat. However, they're maybe overgrown, haven't been used in a while, maybe they're abandoned or just in between uses. Is there another, in terms of low-hanging fruit for conservation opportunities, does it make sense to, as a road grader is going up that road, to kind of veer into that gravel pit and rough it up, get rid of some of the vegetation in the appropriate season, and return that to a suitable potential nesting area, if that's something that makes sense for that that very local spot. Maybe we consider rocking that gravel pit off to avoid vehicles getting in there, etc. To avoid that issue. But is that something that is something that landowners could or should entertain?
I think on a case-by-case basis, there could be some benefit there that might be pretty easy. If it, a lot of sites have good in-stream nesting habitat, and maybe nesting habitat isn't like a lacking resource at the site, but not all sites are like that. And especially if you have more information saying, hey, like we know female wood turtles are using this gravel pit anyway. We've seen them there. Someone sent us photos. Employees have observed them and reported it. Then you can say, all right, they're going there anyway. Like, you could do some off-season management. Driving a grader through there or something like this. You described something pretty crude and easy. That might be real easy when you're already out there with the equipment. But I'd say it's a case-by-case basis.
Well, good. We have only a few minutes left for our allotted time. I want to respect folks' time. We've exhausted my list of notes that I've written down in prep for the workshop, and some other ideas that were sparked by our presenters. Any other thoughts from the group before we leave? Any other comments or any questions? Did I address all the questions that I saw in the chat, or any follow-up questions to John?
No, Henning, I was just saying it's been very interesting and under some pretty tough conditions. And I'm hoping that maybe next year we can do the same out in the field.
Yes, very good point. I think being face-to-face, and especially out in a relaxed field setting, always facilitates lots of conversation, and those side conversations are very important, which is all hindered in a atmosphere or a venue like this. But our plan is not to just leave it here today, folks. Our plan is to keep this conversation going. I want to thank all the presenters for taking the time to put things together and talk to us all today, the researchers for their updates and teasing us with what they're doing in different places. And we will put together some notes and contact information so that everyone can keep cross-pollinating on their work. And we'll look for opportunities to keep this conversation going. I know the Maine Forest Products Council has a wildlife committee here in Maine where the main part of the conversation can keep going. There's Pat's SFI State Implementation Committee, where conversations can continue. And I'm sure there's other venues and opportunities as well. So any final comments from our planning team?
Henning, just one shout out to Ben Nauman, and I wish I knew his wife's name, but last week or two ago, there was a story on WCSH of her and some other folks working with a dog that was trained to sniff out these turtles. And I thought that was a pretty neat story, and it raised some awareness for the public. So.
Yes, great tools. Yeah, between eDNA and dogs, they don't need us humans. So, yeah. All right, everyone. Well, thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.